The dog stopped breathing for exactly 9 seconds. Outside, snow fell in silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emily stood barefoot on the porch, her hand pressed to the frozen glass, whispering his name not like a command, but like a memory. And just when her mother reached for her, Major opened his eyes, not gasping, not panicking, just returning, as if he'd followed her voice back from wherever he'd gone. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The first chill of early October swept through the small town of Maple Hollow. Nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, leaves had begun to turn amber and gold, carpeting the winding roads with the crisp promise of change. The sky that morning was a pale, washed-out blue, tinged with drifting gray clouds as if the heavens were exhaling softly over the hills. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine, dry hay, and distant wood smoke through the town. And at the edge of its southern border sat the Maple Hollow Animal Rescue Center, a modest facility surrounded by tall oaks and silence. Dr. Olivia Bennett, a woman in her late 30s with a soft but weary expression, parked her forest-green Subaru in the gravel lot. She stepped out, adjusting her denim jacket against the breeze. Olivia had the kind of face that once held brightness, but now carried a quiet tiredness behind green eyes. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose braid, and her tall frame moved with the careful energy of someone used to holding it all together for too long. Olivia had once dreamed of working at a big city animal hospital, but after the sudden loss of her husband in a boating accident 5 years ago, she returned to Maple Hollow to raise their daughter, Emily, and take over the small veterinary practice her grandfather had left behind. Emily Bennett was 7 years old, small and slight for her age. She had long chestnut brown hair that often fell into her wide hazel eyes. She walked slowly, deliberately, never quite in sync with the world around her. Diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at age 4, Emily rarely spoke and found solace in routine, quiet corners, and soft textures. That morning, she wore a knitted lavender sweater and held tightly to a small plush animal in one hand. On her left wrist was a faint, naturally shaped birthmark, a soft gray patch no larger than a walnut, oddly shaped like a paw print. The woman waiting at the gate was Gwen Mallory, a mid-50s rescue manager with cropped gray hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a demeanor that mixed brusque practicality with gentle compassion. Gwen had spent decades in rescue work and had seen her share of heartbreak. Still, her voice softened when she saw Emily approach, although her gaze quickly flicked to Olivia. "She's not usually fond of strangers," Olivia said quietly. "We'll take it slow." Gwen nodded. "There's one dog I think you should meet, though, but he's a bit of a special case." They walked together past rows of kennels. Dogs of all sizes barked, some leaping, some whimpering, some silent and watchful. Emily didn't flinch or shrink back. She simply walked with her head tilted slightly down, her fingers brushing the fence wire now and then. Then they reached the last pen, a shaded enclosure tucked into a corner of the property, half hidden by the thick roots of a maple tree. Inside stood a German shepherd. He was massive, larger than any Emily or Olivia had ever seen. Muscles rippled beneath his thick sable coat, which shimmered from gold to charcoal along his powerful frame. His ears stood alert, his body tense, tail low and still. But it was his eyes that caught Olivia's breath, amber, sharp, and intelligent. There was something ancient in them, something not entirely canine. "This is Major," Gwen said, keeping her voice low. "Found him in the woods 6 months ago, half-starved, with a snare still tangled around one leg. Took 3 weeks before he let anyone near. Doesn't bark, doesn't growl, he just watches." Olivia crouched a few feet away, her instincts sharpening. "He's incredible, but not socialized." Gwen shook her head. "I've worked with dogs for 30 years. He's different. He studies people, like he's figuring out what kind of soul they have before making up his mind, without a word." Emily stepped forward. She pressed her small hand to the fence. Major's ears twitched. He didn't move immediately, then, slowly, with the weight of something deeply considered, he walked toward her, not with eagerness, not with fear, just presence. He approached the spot where her fingers met the cold wire, and he sat, still, solid, watching. Emily leaned her head slightly. "Hi," she whispered. It was the first word Olivia had heard her speak in 3 weeks. Her chest tightened, tears springing to her eyes. "Emily." But the girl didn't turn. She stood there, palm pressed to the mesh, and Major pressed his nose to the same spot. "Something's happening," Gwen murmured. Olivia nodded slowly, kneeling beside her daughter, her voice trembling. "What do you feel, sweetheart?" Emily whispered again, almost inaudible. "He's not alone." Gwen exchanged a glance with Olivia. "That's something." That evening, over warm chamomile tea in the Bennetts' modest home, its shelves lined with veterinary texts and faded photographs of Olivia's late husband, mother and daughter sat in silence. Emily was drawing. Not stick figures or flowers, but a dark figure standing next to a small one beneath a canopy of trees. Over them, stars, and between them, a thin red line. "I don't know what this is," Olivia said softly, "but I know what I saw." She returned to the rescue the next day. Gwen met her with raised eyebrows. "You're sure?" "Yes," Olivia said. "We'll adopt him." "There's risk," Gwen warned. "He hasn't been cleared for family placement. No formal testing, no real records, I know." Olivia looked toward Emily, who stood near the fence again. Major was already sitting, waiting. "But I also know my daughter." And for the first time in years, she looked at someone like she knew she belonged. Major came home that afternoon. The first frost came early that year. Morning light spilled in pale streaks through the kitchen window of the Bennett home, touching the tile floor with quiet silver. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains had turned a deeper shade of rust and pine, and the chill in the air had grown sharper, biting gently at the cheeks of anyone brave enough to be outside before dawn, inside. Major lay curled beneath the breakfast table, his broad chest rising and falling slowly, golden brown eyes following Emily as she moved soundlessly from counter to window and back. He had been with the Bennetts for just over 3 weeks, and already his presence had settled into the bones of the house like something meant to be there all along. But Olivia had begun to notice things. Major had nearly doubled in size since they brought him home. His coat had grown thicker, glossier, and his shoulders broader. He moved with a grace that didn't quite fit with his size, too quiet, too deliberate. He had never barked. He didn't jump or pull or dig. He watched, he listened, and he learned. One afternoon, Olivia returned home early from her clinic and found Major standing perfectly still in the living room, facing the front door as if waiting for someone when she approached. He didn't react, not even with a tail wag. Only after Emily walked in from school and placed her hand on his back did his posture relax. Olivia watched her daughter quietly. Emily, who used to curl inward like a shell, now sat for hours with colored pencils and sketch pads, her fingers stained with charcoal and red ink. Oh, she had stopped drawing random shapes or scribbles. Now her drawings were deliberate landscapes, stars, and always two figures, a large dog with glinting eyes and a small girl with a shadow behind her. That evening, Olivia examined one of Emily's newest sketches while washing dishes. In it, the girl and dog stood beneath a crescent moon, a thin red thread stretching from the girl's wrist to the dog's chest. She flipped through the others. The red thread was always there, sometimes knotted, sometimes glowing. Olivia wasn't superstitious, but she knew when something needed explaining. She needed science. She needed someone who could look at Major and tell her what he truly was. She called Dr. Samuel Grady. Dr. Grady was a geneticist at the University of North Carolina in Asheville, a man in his mid-40s with unruly brown curls, deep crow's feet from years of squinting at microscopes, and a voice that always sounded like he was halfway through a yawn, despite his relaxed demeanor. He had a sharp mind and an eye for anomalies, especially in species behavior. He had met Olivia during a regional animal welfare conference 2 years prior, where they had bonded over a mutual frustration with the lack of research funding for rural veterinary studies. Olivia trusted him, mostly because he asked questions no one else thought to ask. The following Saturday, Olivia drove Major to the university's veterinary annex. The sky was gray with oncoming rain, and Major sat calmly in the back seat, staring out the window with quiet interest. Dr. Grady greeted them in a navy fleece jacket and jeans, his office cluttered with genetic maps, X-rays, and pinned charts of canine evolution, a tall mug with the words "Science First." Panic later sat on his desk. "Well," he said, crouching in front of Major, "aren't you a damn fine specimen?" Major didn't flinch. He met the man's gaze, ears flicking slightly. Dr. Grady's brow furrowed. "That's a stare with thoughts behind it." Olivia nodded. "He does that. They ran a full biometric exam, height, weight, reflexes." Major obeyed every touch, every subtle motion from Olivia or Emily, who had insisted on coming. Dr. Grady took blood samples, ran scans, and murmured quietly as each result appeared on the screen. Later, as they waited for preliminary sequencing, Dr. Grady sat back in his chair and blew out a long breath. "I've analyzed hundreds of dogs, purebred and mixed, domestic and wild rescue. This one," he tapped the tablet on his lap, "this one's something else." Olivia crossed her arms. "How else he has markers consistent with domestic German Shepherd lines? Sure, but then there are segments, whole strands, of mitochondrial DNA that resemble ancient canid sequences. Gray wolf, even, and not from recent mixes, but from something older. Maybe even something that's gone." Emily, sitting silently in the corner with her sketchbook, looked up at that moment. Her eyes met Grady's. "He's not just a dog," she said. It was only the second time she had spoken to a stranger in nearly a year. Dr. Grady blinked, glancing at Olivia. "She's perceptive, she knows." Olivia said, "She's been drawing it, the connection." Dr. Grady tapped his pen against the edge of the desk. "Thoughtful. I need to run a deeper scan, whole genome sequencing. We'll need to submit it to the main lab in Raleigh, but I'll push for priority." Olivia nodded. "Do it." Emily drew something while they spoke. When Grady looked at it later, his brow tightened. It was a depiction of DNA, a strand looping like a figure 8, but instead of blue or black lines, it was drawn in crimson, with tiny silver stars orbiting it. He didn't say a word, but he filed the sketch away in a manila folder marked Major, Special Case, that night, back in Maple Hollow. A soft rain fell through the branches, tapping gently against the windows. Olivia tucked Emily into bed and stood for a moment watching her daughter sleep. Major lay at the foot of the bed, his head resting near Emily's feet, his breath slow and steady, in the low light. Olivia noticed something strange when Emily shifted in her sleep. Her hand drifted over the edge of the blanket, landing gently on Major's side. And the dog exhaled, not like a pet sighing, but like someone who had just been found. The wind had changed. Olivia could feel it in the way the pine trees whispered more harshly in the afternoons, in how the shadows stretched longer across the porch even before supper. News had a way of slithering through a small town like Maple Hollow, silent, venomous, and fast, and lately, it all seemed to hiss the same word, danger, after Dr. Grady's preliminary findings. Olivia had tried to keep things quiet, but somehow the whispers had begun. Someone at the university lab had talked, or perhaps it was Gwen at the rescue center, though Olivia doubted that, regardless of the source. People in town had begun to murmur about the big dog, about Emily's strange, quiet drawings, and about the mysterious DNA results that said Major wasn't fully dog. It started with side glances at the grocery store, hushed tones behind church pews. Then came the note slipped under the door of Olivia's clinic in loopy handwriting. This town doesn't need wolves in backyards. At first, Olivia ignored it. She focused on her work, on her daughter, and on Major, who had begun spending longer hours watching the woods from the back porch as if waiting for something only he could hear. Emily, too, had grown quieter again, though not in fear. It was more like she was listening to something inside her, something Olivia couldn't reach. The real escalation came when Harold Burks, a retiree and head of the neighborhood watch, called for a town meeting. Harold was in his early 70s, a barrel-chested man with a full head of white hair and a sharp tongue, dulled only by his fondness for black coffee and overcooked bacon. He'd spent his life in forestry enforcement and now applied the same rigid mindset to everything from noise complaints to recycling bins. What he lacked in empathy, he made up for in decisiveness and fear of the unknown. "The Bennett woman's housing a wolfdog," he said loudly in the town hall, holding a printed photo of Major snapped from across the street. "You think that thing won't snap someday? What happens when it stops being cute and starts being wild?" There were murmurs, a few nods, some crossed arms. Deputy Marcus Hale stood at the back of the room, his arms folded across his chest, listening. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with deeply set eyes and a haunted stillness to his demeanor. His presence carried a quiet authority that required no badge to enforce. His dark uniform was worn clean, boots always polished, but his expression remained weathered by more than years in service. Marcus had been a different man once, before the accident that took his wife and 6-year-old son. Luke. A camping trip gone wrong. A storm. A lost trail. A flash flood that left only Marcus alive and guilt splintered. Since then, he'd lived alone in a cabin at the northern ridge, taking extra shifts and keeping to himself. But he hadn't forgotten Luke's birthmark. A strange gray blur in the shape of a paw that ran along his shoulder blade, visible every time he jumped into his father's arms after bath time. It had meant nothing then. Now, seeing Emily's identical mark and the way she moved in sync with Major, it clawed something open in him. After the meeting, Marcus approached Olivia as she left, her face pale with frustration. "I saw the drawings in the clinic window," he said without preamble. Emily drew a red thread between her and the dog. Olivia stopped, frowning. "I didn't put those drawings up. There, in the side window." Someone did. Olivia blinked. What do you want? Deputy. To help, Marcus said. I know what it feels like when the town turns its back, and I know that dog isn't dangerous. She searched his face. Why do you care instead of answering? Marcus pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. He opened it and handed her a photo, faded at the edges, bent at the corners. A boy, wide smile, tangled blonde hair, and on his bare shoulder, the mark. Olivia stared at it, stunned. My son, he said. Luke. Died 6 years ago. I never told anyone about the mark, didn't think it mattered. But when I saw your girl, saw that dog, something told me this isn't coincidence, that night. Marcus came by the Bennett house again, unofficially. He brought his German shepherd, Ranger, retired from the K-9 unit after a leg injury. Ranger was older, graying around the muzzle, but alert and calm. Olivia was hesitant at first, but when Ranger approached Major, there was no posturing, no challenge, just mutual recognition. Emily sat beside them both in the grass, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She drew Ranger as well, this time with a circle around both dogs and a star at the top. Marcus watched her quietly. She doesn't say much. He said she never needed to. Olivia replied, but lately, it's like she hears something deeper, and I don't know if it's beautiful or terrifying. The next morning, Olivia found a printed notice nailed to her fence, pending review of Animal Code. 14B-8, possible confiscation of dangerous animal. She crushed the paper in her hands, heart pounding. But before she could panic, her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. I have a friend at State Wildlife. Let me take care of this. Later that week, Marcus introduced her to Elise Monroe, a state wildlife liaison, mid-30s, short auburn hair, khaki vest covered in field pins, and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd once been a zookeeper before switching to conservation enforcement, and now handled sensitive animal cases statewide. Elise examined Major, looked over the DNA reports, and frowned. He's not illegal, not unless he's over 85% wild canid, but this isn't about legality. It's about perception. Towns fear what they don't understand. She paused, kneeling to Major's eye level. And this one. He's listening. Like he knows we're deciding something. Emily stepped forward and placed her hand on Major's back. The dog's eyes softened instantly. Elise stood up slowly. If this was a wolf, he'd be reacting differently. He's tethered. Marcus looked at Olivia. We have to prove he's not a threat, and fast. Elise nodded. Then we start with education, community trust, and science. The fog came in heavy that morning, curling low over Maple Hollow like a veil drawn between worlds. The leaves had turned fully now, burnt orange and deep red, and the air carried that crisp, metallic scent of wood smoke and soil. But in the Bennett home, something colder than fall had settled. Emily had stopped eating more than a few bites at a time. Her energy waned. She slept long hours but woke drained, her skin pale, her voice barely a whisper when she spoke at all. Olivia tried to reassure herself that it was just the stress of the recent town commotion. But a mother knows when something deeper is stirring. It wasn't just Emily. Major had changed too. He no longer stood alert at the window or followed Emily through the garden. He had retreated to the far corner of the sunroom, his head resting between his paws, eyes glazed with something beyond fatigue. He refused food, even his favorite chicken broth, and flinched at sudden sounds. His once golden coat had dulled, a faint tremor passing through his limbs at rest. At night, Emily would stir in her sleep, murmuring words Olivia couldn't understand. she once whispered. It's calling again, the red light in the trees. Olivia tried to soothe her, but nothing worked. The bond between Emily and Major, so full of light and energy weeks ago, now seemed like a tether sinking them both. Dr. Grady arrived 3 days later. He looked different. His usual relaxed manner was gone, replaced by a tightness around his eyes and a quickness to his step. He carried a small gray case and wore a buttoned wool coat that made him look 10 years older. I got the genome back, he said before even stepping through the door. I had them run a cross-sample with Emily's old pediatric blood work that you sent me. There's something, Olivia, it's not just a similarity. They sat at the kitchen table, the fog pressing against the windows like breath from another world. Grady pulled out his tablet and opened a dual DNA diagram, one strand labeled Emily, the other Major. A third strand appeared as an overlay, a pulsing red line where the two sequences intersected. This is what I'm calling the Shepherd's link, Grady said. It's a rare fusion segment, a gene that mirrors in both species but doesn't belong entirely to either. This shouldn't be possible. Not across species, but it's there, exact placement, function. And now both are exhibiting synchronized systemic degradation. Olivia paled. So, they're sick because of this. It's more like the connection is collapsing on itself. The genetic resonance that allowed them to thrive is now causing a feedback loop. I've seen this in parasitic pairings, but never symbiotic ones. Grady paused, then added, there might be a way to save them, but it's experimental, radical. She didn't blink. Tell me, a cross-species stem cell transplant. We take healthy marrow from one and graft it into the other. Normally, the body would reject it. But with this shared link, this genetic mirror, it might actually bind, stabilize the feedback, and if it works both ways, they could reinforce each other's recovery. Olivia was silent. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Who gives to whom? Grady looked pained. It has to go both directions. Carefully, simultaneously. They were interrupted by a knock on the back door. Marcus stepped in, his dark jacket still damp with morning dew. He looked from Olivia to Grady and then down the hallway, where Major lay unmoving, and Emily's soft cough echoed behind a closed door. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. Grady nodded, yes, and it's far from simple. Marcus took a slow breath. Then it's time you met someone else. He brought them to the eastern edge of Maple Hollow that afternoon, down a winding gravel path that led into an old wooded glade untouched by development. There, in a clearing framed by moss-covered stones, stood a weathered cabin. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. A wooden sign near the path read, Greyfeather. Joseph. Greyfeather emerged from the cabin with the deliberate calm of someone who understood time differently. He was in his late 60s, of Cherokee descent, with long gray hair tied at the nape and deep, reflective eyes that seemed to pierce through questions before they were asked. He wore a faded canvas coat and a necklace carved from river bone and copper beads. Marcus made the introductions quickly. Joseph listened without interrupting, his gaze never leaving Olivia's face as she spoke. She has a mark, he said when Olivia described Emily's birthmark. Olivia blinked. Yes, and the dog has the other half, he murmured. Then the path is already chosen. Grady raised a skeptical brow. You know about this genetic link? Joseph shook his head. I know the story. Our ancestors called it the blood thread, a rare binding of spirit between human and wild creature. When such a mark appears, it means the line has returned, the soul of the wild walking beside the heart of man. He turned toward the glade and gestured for them to follow. Before you do this medical act, The bond must be acknowledged, not by machines, but by the spirit that remembers. At the heart of the clearing stood a ring of ancient stones, covered in moss and etched with faint symbols worn by time. Joseph laid out cedar and dried sweetgrass in the center, then motioned Olivia to bring Emily, that evening, beneath the weight of dusk. Olivia carried her daughter, feverish, half-conscious, into the circle. Major followed, his legs trembling but steady. He lay down beside Emily as if by instinct. Joseph lit the herbs, the smoke rising in slow spirals. "This is not magic," he said gently, "but memory. Memory passed in bone and blood." He pressed his thumb to Emily's wrist, where the birthmark pulsed faintly, and then to the center of Major's chest. "Two hearts, one bloodline. May the old ones watch and allow this bond to heal, not harm." Emily stirred. Her eyes opened weakly and found Major. A small smile tugged at her lips. "Red light's gone." She whispered. Major shifted, his ears twitching. He exhaled softly and placed his head across her lap. The first light of morning broke across the ridge in pale ribbons of gold and rose. Slipping over the frost-kissed treetops like a prayer whispered into the wilderness. The air was still, thick with anticipation, and the only sound was the quiet thump of boots and rubber soles on packed dirt as the team assembled inside the cabin-turned research lodge at the edge of Wildridge Reserve, an off-grid facility nestled deep within the Blue Ridge Forest, typically used for advanced wildlife observation. Today, it was something else entirely. The main room had been transformed into a dual surgical suite. The scent of antiseptic clung to the wooden walls, mingling with the lingering traces of cedar smoke from the ceremony the night before. Two medical tables were placed side by side, surrounded by a web of machines, monitoring screens, and carefully labeled equipment. One was built for a child, the other, reinforced, was custom-fitted for a German shepherd. Dr. Samuel Grady moved with sharp precision, clipboard in hand, flanked by two new specialists flown in from Chapel Hill, Dr. Leanne Coro, a pediatric immunologist with a keen eye for rare blood disorders, and Dr. Vaughn Elridge, a stoic, silver-bearded veterinarian who'd retired once but came back for unusual cases. Leanne was in her early 40s, slim with dark skin and a mind that moved 3 thoughts ahead of her words. Vaughn was a man of few expressions but endless calm, his presence grounding like the mountains themselves. Rachel Olivia Bennett stood near Emily, who now rested on the child-sized table in a loose hospital gown, her breathing shallow but steady. Her small hand remained curled, even in sleep, as if still holding on to something invisible. Major lay across from her, his great chest rising and falling slowly, eyes closed but ears twitching occasionally. His weight had dropped noticeably in the last week, but he remained strong, still holding on. Marcus Hale stood to Olivia's left, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes locked on Emily's face. He hadn't left her side since arriving the night before, and though he said little, his entire being was etched with silent resolve. His presence was no longer that of a quiet man coping with loss. It had become the shape of someone ready to begin again. Joseph Greyfeather stood in the far corner, dressed in simple, earth-toned robes with a strip of bark-colored cloth tied around his forehead. He did not interfere with the medicine, but his gaze watched every step with the reverence of someone who had walked this kind of line between worlds before. He had placed a woven bracelet around Emily's wrist that morning, beads carved with symbols none of the medical team recognized, but none of them questioned. "Vitals are synchronized," Dr. Leanne Coro said, her voice measured as she checked the screens. "We're going in. The procedure began. Grady and Vaughn worked simultaneously, extracting a portion of stem-rich bone marrow from Major's femur, while Leanne collected a compatible sample from Emily's iliac crest. The process was delicate. Both patients were in a fragile state. And timing was everything. At one point, one of the monitors beeped a sharp alarm as Emily's blood pressure dipped, and Olivia's breath caught. Leanne didn't flinch. Administering stabilizer, "She's still with us." Joseph whispered something under his breath in a language only the trees outside might have understood. Marcus never took his eyes off the two tables. The transfusion itself was brief. Grady's hands trembled slightly as he introduced the first filtered stem cells into Major's IV line. Vaughn nodded to Leanne, who mirrored the procedure with Emily. It was like threading two halves of a broken cord back together, strand by fragile strand. Hours passed, even after the surgical team stepped back and machines began their post-op hums. No one left. Olivia sat beside Emily, holding her tiny hand in both of hers. Marcus knelt beside Major, one palm resting gently on the dog's ribs. Joseph stood unmoving. The room was utterly still. Then, slowly, Major's tail shifted, a single, tentative thump against the padded table. Seconds later, Emily stirred. Her fingers twitched, then flexed. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing hazel eyes that glinted with the faint reflection of the rising sun. "Major," she whispered, from the opposite table. The German shepherd lifted his head. The next several weeks were filled with cautious optimism. Emily's blood counts began to stabilize. The strange fatigue that had gripped her body vanished, and her appetite returned. She smiled again, not constantly, but enough. She laughed. She reached for her mother's hand. And sometimes, without prompting, she even spoke to strangers. Major regained weight. His coat regained its sheen. His steps grew steadier with each passing day, and the faint silver line of the surgical scar across his hind leg disappeared beneath a new layer of dense fur. The connection between them was still visible in small ways. How they moved together. How Emily's eyes always found his first when entering a room. How Major's ears perked at her quiet humming. By spring, the forest had begun to bloom again. Daffodils dotted the roadside. Pine needles glistened with morning dew. And inside the newly refurbished Link Program Center, a joint initiative between Olivia's clinic, the university, and Wildridge Reserve, children with autism, PTSD, and emotional trauma gathered for weekly sessions. At the heart of the program were two anchors, a German shepherd with eyes like burning amber, and a girl whose drawings now lined the classroom walls, crimson threads connecting children to animals, stars to forests, memory to healing. Emily led the morning activity that day, guiding a small group of children through gentle touch introductions with the animals. Major moved slowly among them, lowering his body when near the smallest children, sitting perfectly still as little hands reached for his thick fur. Marcus stood near the entrance, holding a clipboard, now officially listed as a guardian volunteer. Olivia smiled from the edge of the room, her arms crossed, pride in every line of her face. Joseph Greyfeather still visited monthly, sometimes bringing hand-carved gifts for the children, sometimes only stories. That evening, as the sun slipped below the pines, Emily, now nearly 8, sat beneath the old maple tree at the edge of the property. Major lay beside her. Marcus approached and sat down slowly on her other side. She looked up at him, then leaned into his side. "I'm not alone anymore," she said quietly. Marcus placed his arm around her small shoulders. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "You're not." She smiled and added, I have Major, and I have you. He swallowed hard. Yes, you do. Sometimes. The most extraordinary miracles don't come in flashes of lightning or parting skies, but in quiet connections, in the silent understanding between a girl and a dog, in the invisible thread of love that even science cannot explain. Emily and Major's bond was more than chance, it was purpose. It was a reminder that God's design stretches far beyond what we can see, weaving lives together in ways that heal what the world has broken. In our everyday lives, we may not always recognize these divine threads, but they are there in moments of comfort, in unexpected friendships, in the resilience of a child's smile, or the loyalty of a faithful animal. Perhaps God speaks loudest not through thunder, but through compassion, through courage, and through love. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below if you believe love can be a miracle. Type Amen if you believe God still works through the most unlikely bonds. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, healing, and wonder. And may the Lord bless you and those you love, wherever you are.